this is David with David's Tutorials, and I'm sitting here with two of my Tulsa granddaughters. We've got the birthday girl here. This is
Esther.
Esther had a birthday today, and she is 900 years old. No, not 900 years old. 9 years old. And over here is Naomi. And Naomi had a birthday just last week, and Naomi turned to be a
13-year-old
teenager. Oh my goodness. So granddaughters are wonderful, and I am just so happy to be here with them. And I'm just going to sit here and chat with Esther and Naomi about survival school that I went through with the Air Force. Okay? Okay, let's get started. Now, feel free to ask any questions that you wish throughout here, because this is going to go up on YouTube, and if you have a question, probably somebody out there in YouTube land is going to have the same question, so feel free to ask it. Now, the year was 1971, or maybe it was 1970. It's been a long time. I think it might have been 1970 because I graduated pilot training in 1970, and then later that year I went to survival school. Right out of pilot training, I went to survival school. Now, survival school, they send pilots and other air crew members to survival school just in case you have to bail out of an airplane and you are land in a place where you don't know where you are, and there's like you're in a jungle or you're in the mountains or you're just somewhere that you need to survive. So we had to go to survival school. Now, this survival school was in the town of Spokane, Washington. It's way over, let's see, they're looking at it this way, it's way over on the east side of Washington, and there's some mountains around there too, and there's an Air Force base right there, and we went to that Air Force base, and that's where we had our survival school. So the first thing we did, we went to about 2 weeks of classroom training. We had to go into a class with a lot of other students, and there were instructors that they came up in front of the class and they taught us a lot about survival techniques and philosophies. And I remember, it was a few years ago, but I still remember a few things they said. When you're out there and you need to eat something, you can eat pretty much anything that has protein in it as long as you cook it well enough. And this includes such things as earthworms and spiders. And I remember the instructor there, he said, spiders, they taste kind of like peanut butter. And I was thinking, really? I don't think I'm going to find that out for myself. So anyway, and he had a few other things that he taught us, and they taught us about navigation. You know, if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're not sure where you are, you will have a map, and here's a compass, and they showed us how to use the map and the compass. It's called orienteering. And if you're into scouting, you'll probably pick some of that up on your own as well. But there are other things about leaving your trail. So one of the things they told us is if you bail out of the airplane, the first thing you want to do is stay where you land, because that's where they're going to look for you. Because when you're going down in a parachute, if you bail out of an airplane, there's a beacon, a radio beacon that goes off in the parachute pack. And if there are other airplanes in the area, they'll hear this beacon on the radio and it's going pew, 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 like that. And they say, oh, somebody just bailed out of an airplane, and they know to go look for them, and they can dial in a direction finder on their radio, and the direction finder will point where that beacon is coming from, and so they'll have a good idea of where you are. And sometimes when you bail out of an airplane, you might be in enemy territory. That means, you know, the Air Force is a military organization, and the military exists only because our country has enemies, and the enemies want to do us harm. And so if you have to bail out of an airplane, sometimes you might be in their territory, in which case you have to hide and escape and evade. So that's what we had to do when we were learning all this stuff in the classroom. And we learned an awful lot more in the classroom. And of course, it's been, as I said, a number of years since I learned that stuff, so that particular information has kind of faded into the mists of obscurity. Yeah, question?
I have a question.
Okay.
How old were you when you went to survival school?
I was about 24 years old.
Wow.
And that's younger than your mommy and daddy are right now.
Wow.
Yeah, but I was about 24 years old when I went there. Now, I'm going to have something else to tell you about being 24 years old in a little bit. Okay, well, anyway, after we graduated from the classroom training, of course, we had to take a test and pass the test, make sure we learned what we were supposed to learn. We then had a weekend off, and all of the students of Survival School, they went and had fun in town over the weekend. And then we came back the next day after the weekend was over, and the first thing we had to do was an obstacle course. Now remember, I told you that sometimes you had to do escape and evasion. Like if you land in enemy territory, you don't want to get caught by the enemy. You want to stay away from them, and so they taught us that. And so what we had to do, we had to wait until it was dark. And then they had this, it was almost about the size of a football field, but it was an obstacle E&E meaning escape and evasion, an E&E course that we had to make our way through. Now, some of the things they taught us in the classroom was that a lot of times enemy will string little wires like fishing line across the pathways. And if you trip on this line, it'll pull the pin out of a grenade, and the grenade will go boom, and that could ruin your day. Yeah, it could. So they taught us what you need to do is you need to get a real thin stick or a reed or something, and you move it in a figure 8 in front of you as you're moving in the dark. And that way you'll be able to feel this little wire or fishing line before you trip on it and be able to step over it. And one of the things they did as we were going through this obstacle course was they had instructors that were supposedly enemy soldiers that were prowling the course, and if you got caught by one of these instructors, they would grab your card and they would mark on it, "I caught this guy." And basically it was supposed to mean that you didn't do as well as you should have. But I saw this guy coming because I was way down low near the ground. Now, I was in the Boy Scouts, and I love going out in the woods. And there was a time when I went out in the woods in Boy Scouts, and we were playing Capture the Flag, and it was right about sunset. And I was on this sandy road between the forests, and all of a sudden I could hear the opposing team coming down this road. So I just ran off the side of the road, and I lay down in the bushes where it was dark, and I had on dark clothes. And this entire opposing team, they walked right by me within like about 3 feet of me, and they didn't see me. And you know why? I didn't move. I was dark on dark, and they were in the white, and they weren't paying much attention. They didn't see me. So when I was on the obstacle course, I was lying down, and I could see this sentry coming. And so I got in a little gully, and I just lay real still, and I hid my head so that the flash of my face wouldn't show white. Well, this guy tripped on me. He was walking in the little gully, and that was his patrol area, and I didn't know that. And he tripped on me, and as soon as he tripped on me, he said, "Oh," and I said, "You're dead." In other words, I kind of ambushed him. Rather than him saying, "I caught you," I said, "You're dead." And he said, "Wow, you did great. I'm going to give you a plus mark on that." And he took my card and he gave me a plus mark. Never heard anything about that plus mark. But anyway, I was feeling really proud that I was able to get the better of the guard or the sentry. Anyway, when you get to the end of this obstacle course, you had all these things that they had taught you about in the classroom that you were encountering, and they didn't have hand grenades on the tripwires. They did have tripwires, and I think I went across 2 or 3 of them. I found them, and of course I stepped over them, and they said, "If you hit a tripwire, don't worry, it's not a grenade, it's a flare. It will just send a little rocket up, fireworks up into the sky, and it won't hurt anybody, but it will be as though you had tripped a grenade, and you would have your whole day ruined at that point." But it was training, and you don't want to hurt anybody in training, that's for sure. So anyway, at the end of the obstacle course, you had to turn yourself in and turn in your card, and then you were captured. And that's when we moved into the 3rd phase of this survival training. And the 3rd phase was a POW camp. Do you know what a POW is?
Prisoners of war.
Prisoners of war. You had to be captured and then put into a POW prisoner. You were a prisoner. Now, generally, I think what had happened, this was really late at night, and they kept us in this POW camp, it was a compound that was had a chain link fence with barbed accordion wire up at the top of it, and they fed us a little canteen cup. It had rice and shrimp in it, and it was really salty. And I think they had done that just because they wanted to make sure we had enough salt and didn't get dehydrated. And they, of course, they gave us enough water. And in that POW compound, they had certain people who were designated as the camp leaders, and they had certain people who were designated, they had an escape chit. And these were the only people who were allowed to escape. And the reason they did that was because in earlier versions of survival school, somebody tried to escape who really wasn't supposed to, and he did. He escaped out of this POW compound, and he made his way out of the compound all the way across this Air Force base. Now, this was an Air Force base where they had B-52s sitting on alert, and these B-52s had nuclear weapons on board. This was just in case Russia launched an attack on the U.S. These B-52s were supposed to take off and take care of them, and hopefully just the fact that they were being there ready to go to war kept them from attacking us. And that's the whole reason they were sitting on alert. They were sitting on alert. And so this guy, he made his way all the way across the Air Force base, and he came up to the compound where these nuclear-armed B-52s were sitting on alert. And he had made it across the outside perimeter of the B-52 compound, and he was headed for the internal fence, and this internal fence was electric. And if he had reached that fence, he would have been electrocuted. But it turned out that when he reached the outside fence, it set off alarms, and all of the security police, they converged on the area and they caught him before he hit the electrified fence. That's why they only had a few people that were allowed to try to escape from the POW compound. Well, they kept us there most of the night, and then they took us all and they herded us inside, and I guess this was during the daytime. But then we were not allowed to see daylight, so they brought us inside. They put us in cells, and we each had our own individual cell. And what they told us is once you get in the cell, if the guards come in and they yell at you, that's the same as if they were to beat you. And if they slap the wall with their hand, boom, that's the equivalent of you getting hit with a rifle butt. So they weren't going to hit us, of course, but you know, if you did something to upset them, they would slap the wall, and you know, well, I would have got hit with a rifle butt if it was the real enemy. And this cell that we were in, it was only 4 feet square and 5 feet tall. Well, you know how tall most men are, right? They're just about all taller than 5 feet. So you had to stand in the cell, and by the way, you were supposed to stand all the time, and if they caught you doing anything except standing up, they would yell at you and they might slap the wall. So they had to do that, and then they would take you for interrogation. And the same thing in the interrogation, they made you sit on a one-legged stool. And one of the other things they told us is that if you are truly sick, you need to ask to see the flight surgeon, and that way they'll know you're not kidding and you're not putting on. You're not playing a role. And if you ask to see the flight surgeon, you better really be sick. Okay? And the other rule we had was you're not allowed to fake claustrophobia. Do you know what claustrophobia is?
Yeah, it's being scared of being tight in like a tight room.
It's exactly
like small
right.
rooms.
Scared of small spaces.
Exactly right. So you were not allowed to fake claustrophobia. Now, one of the things they would do is they would take us into this interrogation room, and there were 2 staff members in there, and they would be interrogating us and asking us all these questions. And then they would take you and they would put you in the box. And this is why you could not fake claustrophobia, because this box was only about 2 feet by 2 feet by 3 feet. And you had to hug your knees and be in the box. And it felt like you were in there forever, but I'm sure it was only about 10 minutes. And I got to tell you 2 more stories about the box and the interrogation room. The first story is a friend of mine named Ted. I had known him from before, and we had been kind of friends before. He was a very thin guy. He was not tall, and he was very, very thin. And they could adjust the box and make the box smaller or larger depending on the size of the person, because they wanted to make you feel closed in and tight, but they didn't want to totally get you scared and panic and all that. So Ted, he got in the box and they put him in there and they left him, and Ted turned around. He wasn't supposed to be able to turn around inside the box, so he turned around inside the box, and they came back and they got him. He had turned around and they got all upset about it, and they made the box as small as they could make it, and they put him back in, and he turned around again. And he started thinking, you know, this is probably not a real good idea. So he turned back around so he was facing the same way, and they didn't yell at him again. Well, when they got me into the interrogation room, I told them, I can't talk, I need water. Water, I've got to have some water. And they weren't going to give me any water. And I was so convincing, they finally asked me, do you need to see the flight surgeon? And I said, no, I need water. And they finally just gave up on me. So, but they knew I was playing a role at that point. So that was a story I had there in the compound cell. Oh, and one more story about the cells. When I was in the 4x4 by 5 foot cell, they had a little hole in the bottom where they would give you a tin cup of water, and every once in a while they would give you a little bit of something to eat, and it wasn't very good. And okay, I'll just eat that. And I noticed that I could lie down on the floor of that cell with my ear right near that opening, and I could hear the guard coming down the hall. And when the guard would come down the hall, I'd stand up, and when he looked in my cell, I was standing up in the cell. And then as soon as he moved on, I'd lie back down on the floor. You know, just the things that you learn to do. And one other thing, you were not supposed to bring any food in there. Well, it was a field jacket. It's a military field jacket, a big heavy coat. This was in November. And I had gotten a candy bar, and I smashed it almost as flat as a piece of paper inside its wrapper, and I put it up inside the lining of the coat, and they never found it. You're supposed to feel all the areas of your coat, make sure you're not bringing anything in. So I had a candy bar while I was in the cell. So anyway, we then got out of the cell, and we had like a day off, and then they took us on our hike and our camp out. Well, the hike and the camp out, they took us out into the mountains, and they dropped us off, and we had to carry about a 60-pound pack. We walked about 3 hours up into the mountains, and we came to a campsite that they had for us, and we learned how to build our campsite, to use parachute sections for shelters. And this was in the mountains of eastern Washington in late November and early December. Now, when we camped out up there, we had a field jacket and other good clothing, so we were nice and warm, but we were in the clouds. Now, you know what a cloud is, right?
Yeah.
It's basically just water that's condensed inside the air, so it was very moist. Everything was kind of wet. And you know what the temperature was? Between 34 and 37 degrees.
That is pretty cold.
That is, and when you're wet and it's 35 degrees outside, it's not very comfortable, but we did okay. And when you create a shelter, we had a good sleeping bag to sleep in. We slept 2 nights in the camp. The forest rangers had caught a poacher who had shot a deer, and the forest rangers, they took the poachers and they put them in jail, and they took the deer and they gave chunks of it out to the people, the instructors who had campers in the field. And so we had deer venison for dinner one night, and that was actually pretty good. But we stayed there for 2 nights, and it was very cold, and I did not want to put my head inside my sleeping bag. If you've ever put your head inside a sleeping bag on a very cold night, you know what happens? Your breath, condensation, the moisture in your breath condenses inside the bag, and it starts getting the inside of the bag wet, and I didn't want to do that, but it was too cold to leave my head outside. So you know what I did? I took some pieces of parachute, and I built a mini tent. It was basically just a box. I used sticks from the woods, and I propped it up, and I built like a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot tent that I just put around my head. And I could breathe with my head outside the sleeping bag, but my breath inside that mini tent kept it warm in there, so I was perfectly comfortable. I was just really happy with that. So that was what we did when we were camping, and we'll have one more item here and then we'll be done. Now, in this group of people that we had, it was about, I'd say, 10 people, plus or minus 2, that we were in our campsite, and other instructors had other groups of people, and I think there were about 6 or 8 groups out in various places in the mountains of eastern Washington doing what we were doing. And on the 3rd day, we had to hike out of there, and it was about a 4-hour hike. And one of the things we learned is that when you're going through the mountains and it's not smooth, even terrain, you're going to make about 1 mile an hour. So we only had to go like 5 miles to get out to where the bus was going to meet us and take us back. Well, in this group of people that we had, most of us were brand new lieutenants, either second lieutenants or first lieutenants that were just fairly new in the Air Force for like just a year, maybe a little bit more. And so we started hiking out, but in this group, we also had one guy who was a captain, and we had one really old guy who was a major, and he was probably in his mid-30s, maybe close to 40 years old. And this is where you ask, how old was I? I was 24 at the time. I mean, he was really old compared to 24. So we went for about 2 hours, and this old man, the major, started whining. He said, I can't make it. This is just too much. Each of us was carrying a 60-pound pack. And so the instructor came back to us, and he said, if he doesn't complete this hike, he's going to have to do the entire school from the beginning. Start all over again. But if he makes a hike out, if you guys will somehow figure out how to help him, then he will graduate. Now, to this day, I don't know whether this was a test, if the major was a plant, you know, if they put him there on purpose to test whether we would help him out. But we decided, hey, we're going to help him out. We're not going to let him fail the course and have to start it all over again. So we each took a turn. We carried our pack that was 60 pounds and his pack that was another 60 pounds. So we carried 120 pounds for about a half an hour each, all the way out. You know, when we'd carry it for about a half an hour and say, okay, I'm getting tired, and the next guy would take it and he would put it on top of his back. So we would carry about 120, and of course, being 24 years old, I mean, we were macho. Oh, I could carry 120 pounds. And so we were happy to do that, and, you know, just kind of prove our masculinity and showing that we could do that. But that was what we did, and we finished the hike out, and we all graduated, and we got in the bus and went back to the base, and that was the survival school from the Air Force in the mountains of eastern Washington in either 1970 or 71, and it was a fun experience that I'm not sure I'd want to do again, but I'm glad I did it the one time. So, do you have any questions?
Not that I can think of.
Oh, I must have covered everything really well.
Yeah, quite the adventure.
It was an adventure. And if people were to join the Air Force today and become a member of a flight crew, they would probably have to go through some kind of survival school training. You have a question?
Nope.
No question. Well, I must have covered everything beautifully then. Well, in any case, I want to thank everybody for watching this. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as Esther and Naomi seem to have enjoyed this thing. And if you like this video, you know what to do. Give me that thumbs up so that I and the YouTube robots will know that you thought it was good, and they will know that they should recommend this video to other people. Leave us a comment down in the comment section below. If you have a question, or if you know somebody who went to survival school, and if you have some input, so maybe you went through survival school, tell us about that. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. I appreciate every single subscriber to this channel. And if you're not, why not go ahead right now and click that subscribe button and then the bell icon so YouTube will let you know by email when we post another great video right here on David's Tutorials and Vlog channel. Meantime, everybody have a wonderful day, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye! Bye-bye!